I was working as military police at the time, just starting my night shift. Like always, I began by checking over my patrol car, making sure everything was set for the next 8 to 12 hours on duty. Shift change always had a certain rhythm. The day shift came back in, turned in their gear, and gave a rundown of what had gone on. The night shift picked up from there, and for a little while the lot outside the station would be busy with cars coming and going. I was standing outside my patrol car, checking my radar unit to make sure it was calibrated properly. That was when the radio crackled to life, and dispatch called out that they had just gotten a report of a man with a gun walking toward the main gate. The words hit me in the gut. Even before I looked up, I could feel my heart start to pound. When I did glance across the lot, I caught the eyes of one of my partners, who was also standing outside his car. He had the same expression on his face that I did. It wasn't surprise, it wasn't confusion. It was that quick, sharp look of understanding. We both knew what that call could mean. In our world, man with a gun was never taken lightly, especially near the gate of a military base. Neither of us said anything. We just gave each other that look, and then at the same time, we both got into our cars and took off. My tires screeched as I floored it, racing toward the gate. I don't know exactly how fast I was going, but I'd guess I hit somewhere between 80 and 90. My eyes flicked from the road to my mirrors to the speedometer, but mostly I was locked on what could be ahead of me. My mind was running faster than the car. All I could think about was Fort Hood. Not long before, that base had experienced a mass shooting. Soldiers killed on their own post by one of their own. That tragedy had changed the way a lot of us thought about man with a gun calls. Add to that the fact that less than a year earlier, the FBI had caught someone trying to sneak a bomb onto our own installation. That was still fresh in my head. So as I drove toward the gate, my body was already bracing for the worst, either an active shooter situation or some kind of attack. My throat was dry, and I could feel my pulse in my ears. When I rolled up to the main gate, I had the window down before I was even fully stopped. I leaned out and shouted to one of the soldiers on guard duty, asking where the suspect had gone. The soldier just pointed down the road that led off base. The thing was, even though it was technically off the main gate, that road was still military property until it reached the stoplight in town. That meant the responsibility was ours. I didn't waste a second. I slammed the gas pedal down and headed down that road. My partner was behind me. The whole time, my chest felt tight, like I was just waiting for gunfire to erupt. I scanned the road ahead, my spotlight ready, adrenaline buzzing so hard I barely noticed the cold air blowing in through my window. Then I saw him, a man walking along the shoulder of the road. I flipped on my spotlight and aimed it at him. The beam caught something in his hand, and instantly I saw a gleam of metal. My stomach dropped. It was exactly what I had been expecting. That flash looked just like the reflection of a gun barrel. I hit the brakes hard, the tires squealing as the car jerked to a stop. I threw it into park, flung the door open, and had my pistol out before my boots hit the pavement. My voice came out loud and sharp, commands echoing across the quiet stretch of road. I ordered him to show me his hands, to put them up, to not move. The man froze in place, and my heart was hammering so hard it felt like my whole chest was shaking. In those few seconds, everything stretched out. My eyes were locked on his hand. I was waiting for him to lift it up, to point it at me, to fire. I was already feeling the trigger press under my finger, already seeing how fast I would have to react if he tried. It felt like the world around me had narrowed to just the man, the metal flash, and my gun. But then, in that hard beam of the spotlight, I saw more clearly. The object in his hand wasn't a gun at all. It was a thermos. The shiny surface had caught the light and given off that flash that looked exactly like a weapon. My stomach was still twisting even as the truth set in. My partner's car skidded in behind me, lights bouncing across the road. He jumped out, came up quickly, and moved in to pat the man down while I kept my pistol trained on him. The man stood stiff as a board. He didn't resist, but I could see the fear in the way his shoulders hunched and his head angled down. When my partner confirmed he was unarmed, I finally lowered my pistol. My hands were trembling, and it took me a second to reholster it. I knew the man had probably just gone through one of the scariest moments of his life, and so had I. We were both caught in a situation that could have turned tragic in an instant. The report we later got was that someone driving by had seen him walking, caught the reflection of the thermos, and assumed it was a gun. They called it in right away, and from their point of view, it probably had looked exactly like what they thought they saw. Couldn't blame them, but it had put all of us into a dangerous moment. The night air was cold, and the man didn't have much more than a thin jacket. I needed to do some paperwork on him, so I told him to sit in the passenger seat of my patrol car while I filled it out. He explained that he had a DUI conviction, which was why he was walking instead of driving. He worked as a janitor at one of the schools on base. Just a regular guy trying to get from one place to another, and he'd ended up staring down the barrel of a pistol because of a reflection off his thermos. Sitting there, writing out the paperwork, I couldn't stop apologizing to him. I kept glancing at him and shaking my head, the adrenaline still wearing off in shaky waves. He didn't say much, just sat quietly, probably still in shock from the whole thing. By the time I finished and let him go, the night felt heavier than usual. I watched him walk off into the darkness, his thermos still tucked under his arm, and thought about how close we all came to something none of us would have been able to take back. Looking back now, it's almost funny. Just a man with a thermos mistaken for a gun. But in that moment, with everything fresh in my memory, the shootings, the bomb attempt, the high-speed rush to the gate, there was nothing funny about it. It was deadly serious. My body had been ready for a gunfight, ready for chaos, ready to take a life if I had to. That night taught me a lesson I've carried ever since. Things can look one way in the heat of the moment and turn out to be something else entirely. The margin for error is razor thin, and the cost of a mistake can be permanent. For a few seconds, I was living in that margin, and so was a man who just happened to be walking down the wrong road at the wrong time with a shiny thermos in his hand. I drove away from that scene with a knot in my stomach that didn't ease for hours. When the shift finally ended, I sat in my car for a long while before heading home, thinking about how close I had come to pulling the trigger, how close he had come to never making it back to work, how close we all had come to adding another tragedy to the list. And that's the part that sticks with me most. Not the paperwork, not the call, not even the rush of the drive. It's that thin, fragile line between what could have happened and what did, and how sometimes all it takes to blur that line is a reflection off a piece of metal on a cold night. Midnight shifts always had a certain feel to them. The world looks different after midnight, quieter in some ways, but also sharper. The lights feel brighter, the shadows feel heavier, and the people you come across are rarely the type you want to see in daylight. That night was no different. It was just past 1 in the morning when dispatch put out the call. A shooting at a fast food restaurant. The kind of place you drive past 1,000 times without thinking. I remember glancing at my partner as the call came through. Neither of us said anything, but the look said enough. A shooting at that hour is never simple. We rolled up to the place fast, lights bouncing off the building's faded yellow paint and cracked parking lot. I could already see a small group of people gathered near the drive-through lane. People don't normally stick around when shots are fired, so I knew whatever was waiting for us wasn't good. As I got closer, I heard a sound that stays with me to this day. Someone screaming, not just yelling, but that deep, gut-wrenching scream that only happens when something terrible has happened. I stepped out of the cruiser and the scene came into focus. A car sat angled awkwardly near the drive-through window, headlights still on, engine running. A woman was covered head to toe in blood, screaming and clutching a man who was somehow still on his feet. The victim looked like something out of a nightmare. His face was soaked in blood, skin pale, mouth hanging open, and where his mouth should have been, there was just a mess of tissue and blood pouring down his chest. He was swaying like he could fall any second, and yet he was standing like his body hadn't figured out it was already gone. I rushed toward him, telling myself to stay calm. My partner moved toward the crowd, pushing them back, while I went straight to the victim. Up close, it was worse. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, like he was trying to understand what was happening but couldn't. Blood covered everything. His shirt, his arms, his fiancée's dress. the concrete beneath them. He was groaning, low, guttural sounds mixed with choking gurgles. His hands kept moving toward his head, clawing at his own skull like he was trying to pull something out. I dropped to my knees and grabbed his wrists, holding them down. His strength was erratic, like jolts of electricity running through him. 1 second he was weak, the next he was thrashing hard enough to make my arms shake. His fiancée was beside us, screaming words I couldn't even process. It wasn't language anymore. It was just raw pain ripped out of her throat. Her hands were smeared with his blood, trying to touch his face, his chest, anywhere she could. The crowd around us was buzzing. Some people were crying, others were shouting about what happened. A few had their phones out. I tuned all of that out. My focus was on keeping the victim alive until EMS got there. I pressed him back onto the curb, trying to keep him upright enough so he wouldn't drown in his own blood. His chest was heaving, convulsions running through him, legs twitching uncontrollably. The smell of iron filled my nose. Blood has a certain smell that you never forget, sharp and heavy, and when there's that much of it, it's overwhelming. It coated my gloves, soaked into my pants as I knelt there, and sprayed onto my vest when he coughed. His groaning grew louder, then weaker, then loud again. It was like his body couldn't make up its mind if it was done or not. I remember looking into his eyes and seeing nothing stable there. He looked like a man already gone, yet he kept fighting to stand, to move, to do anything but die. That's the part that stuck with me. He had been shot twice in the back of the head, and somehow his body wasn't ready to stop. He looked like a walking corpse, a zombie dragged out of a horror film, except this was real. This was right in front of me. His fiancée's screams reached a pitch that rattled me. It wasn't just grief, it was disbelief. She kept saying his name over and over, as if saying it enough times might wake him back up. Her whole body shook as she clung to him. The blood on her dress turned it nearly black. She wasn't just watching him die. She was drowning in it, unable to pull herself away. Minutes stretched out into what felt like hours. Every second I expected him to stop breathing, to collapse into my arms. But he didn't. He just groaned, twitched, and fought against me, his hands still trying to claw at his head. I held his wrists tighter, whispering under my breath for him to stay still, to just hold on until EMS got there. My partner called out updates from behind me, but I couldn't focus on the words. Finally, I heard the sirens. EMS rushed in, bags in hand, moving fast. We eased him down onto the pavement as they took over, working quickly, speaking in clipped, professional tones. They loaded him onto a stretcher, strapped him down, and worked to stabilize him as best they could. His fiancée tried to climb onto the stretcher with him, but another officer pulled her back, holding her tight as she kicked and screamed. She was soaked in blood, her hair plastered to her face, her voice breaking. I stood there, covered in his blood, hands shaking slightly, just watching as they pushed him into the ambulance. The lights flashed red and white across the faces of the crowd, across the drive-through menu board, across the woman who had just lost her future. Then the doors slammed shut, and they were gone. Later, we learned he didn't make it. He died at the hospital, 2 bullets to the back of the head, all because he honked his horn in a drive-through. That was it. A sound so small, so normal, that any of us have done 100 times without thinking. A simple honk to get someone's attention. But that night, it cost him his life. The suspect ran, of course, coward with a bruised ego, humiliated after losing a fight he started, decided to settle it with a gun. A man who couldn't handle being knocked down turned himself into a killer in the span of seconds. People say fights are about pride, about ego, but I'll tell you what they're really about: chance. One man fights, one man falls, and sometimes one man never goes home again. When I think back to that night, it isn't the gunshots I remember, because I didn't hear them. It isn't even the suspect's face, because I never saw it. What I remember most is the victim standing there like a broken statue, blood pouring down, eyes staring, body trembling, refusing to collapse until EMS forced him down. I remember the sound of his fiancée's scream, that awful, primal sound of someone realizing the person they love is slipping away in front of them. That scene sits heavy in me because it showed me something that doesn't get said enough. You don't know who's around you. and you don't know what they'll do. You don't know which driver in a parking lot has a gun under the seat, or which man in line is one insult away from murder. Life is fragile, so fragile that a single honk of a horn at 1 in the morning can end it. Every time I pass a fast food place late at night, I think of him. I think of the blood, the screams, the fight he never should have had, the gun he never saw coming. I think about how close home was for him, literally across the street. He and his fiancée just wanted a meal before bed. They walked across the road, and within minutes, their whole future was gone. That's the truth of the job. You don't forget the bodies, you don't forget the screams, and you don't forget how fast life can be stolen. A man died that night not because of drugs, gangs, or some deep criminal plot. He died because he honked his horn. That's all it took. The night of that call is still carved into my head. It's been years since I left the job, but when I think back to the moment I realized how close I had come to dying, I can still feel my throat tighten and my chest get heavy. I used to think nothing would ever shake me. I thought I was tougher than fear, tougher than death. But that night proved to me that sometimes it only takes one split second, one overlooked detail to change everything. That was the call that made me walk away from being a cop. We were serving a no-knock search warrant on a suspected drug house. The kind of place you don't even need to check twice to know what's going on inside. The front lawn was littered with junk, windows covered in old sheets, cars parked in the yard with flat tires. Every detail screamed trouble. I had been on the job for a few years at that point, and I had done my share of warrants, fights, pursuits, you name it. But something about this house had me wired tight before we even lined up. The plan was simple, the same formation we always used. First man through secures the first body. Second man takes the second. Third takes the third. I was fourth in line, which meant whoever was standing fourth closest or whoever ran past me was mine. The adrenaline before breaching a door like that is hard to explain. You feel your blood hammering in your ears, but your head goes sharp, like a switch flips and the world narrows down to one moment. The battering ram hit the door, the wood cracked, and just like that we were inside. Shouting, bodies moving, suspects frozen or scrambling. Feels like chaos, but there's order in it. First officer lunged at the closest suspect, got him down. Second officer tackled the next. Third grabbed his. My eyes locked on the fourth man, and of course, he bolted. He took off down a narrow hallway, and without thinking, I was after him. My boots pounded against the floor, my vest weighing heavy on my chest, my weapon drawn but pointed down. He was fast, desperate, slipping around the corner into a room. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the frame. I didn't pause. Training doesn't let you pause. I hit the door with my shoulder and burst inside. The room was small and smelled of sweat and old smoke. He had stumbled backward against a bed, his arm half hidden beneath it. I didn't give him the chance to pull out whatever he was reaching for. I lunged, tackled him hard, the bed frame groaning under the impact. My knee pinned his chest, one hand forcing his arm back, the other fighting to keep control. He thrashed, cursing, but I had the weight advantage. I yanked his arm out and got him pinned long enough to cuff him. By the time I had him restrained, my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was in my throat. My mind registered something strange, that he had his hand under the bed the whole time until I forced it out. But in the rush, with officers shouting behind me, suspects crying out in the living room, it didn't fully click. I dragged him back down the hallway to the others. The living room was chaos. Suspects on their knees, zip ties cutting into their wrists, officers sweeping corners, shouting commands. I left him with the others, my hands shaking harder than I wanted to admit. Something in my gut wouldn't let me walk away, though. I had to go back. That image of his arm disappearing under the bed, the way he held on like something was there. It gnawed at me. So I turned around, walked back down that hallway, and stepped into the room again. The smell of dust and mildew hit me. The bed sat crooked against the wall, sheets bunched up. I crouched down, lifted the edge, and froze. Right there, inches from where his fingers had been, was a sawed-off double-barrel shotgun. Black steel cut short both hammers back. My chest went cold. I reached for it with hands that didn't feel like they belonged to me. When I pulled it out and cracked it open, I saw 2 fat slugs sitting in the chambers. Loaded, ready. I just sat there on the floor for a second, staring at it, my gloves smudged with dust. My brain replayed the last 30 seconds over and over. Him reaching under, me diving on top, the fight, my weight pinning him down. If he had gotten that gun, if I had been half a second slower, if his fingers had wrapped around the grip before mine pinned his wrist, I wouldn't be here. I would have been just another name carved into a stone, another folded flag handed to my family. I took photos, my hands trembling while I held the camera. Every click of the shutter felt like a gunshot in my head. Evidence, chain of custody, procedure, all of it came back automatically, but it felt hollow. I bagged the gun, sealed it, walked it out. My legs felt like they were made of sand. The rest of the search blurred together. Drugs on the counter, baggies, scales, cash. Nothing I hadn't seen before, but none of that mattered. I couldn't get my mind off that shotgun, off how close it had been, off how fast things could have ended. For the next 2 nights, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it all again. The suspect's hands sliding under the bed, my body crashing down on him, the barrels of that shotgun flashing in my head. I woke up in a sweat, heart hammering, the taste of bile in my throat. At work, I went through the motions, but I felt detached, like I was moving through fog. I'd sit in the locker room before shift and just stare at my gear, asking myself why I was still putting it on. 3 weeks later, I resigned. People asked why, and I gave the easy answers: burnout, stress, wanting something different. But the truth is, that one call broke something in me. It stripped away the idea that I could handle anything, that I could outtrain or outthink danger. That night showed me just how fragile it all is. 1 second, 1 decision, 1 reach under a bed, and everything can change. Walking away wasn't easy. I had built my whole identity around the badge, the uniform, the work. But every time I thought about staying, I thought about that shotgun. I thought about how close I came to being a memory. And in the end, I decided I'd rather be alive without the badge than dead with it. That's the call that ended my career. That's the night that made me realize law enforcement wasn't for me. And no matter how many years pass, no matter how much life I build after it, I'll always carry that memory. Not as a badge of honor, not as a story to brag about, but as the moment I learned the line between life and death is a lot thinner than I ever wanted to believe. I was working night shift as an EMT, one of those shifts that dragged on and blurred into the morning. The call came through at about 3 in the morning, right around Halloween. I had learned to hate the vague call types, the ones that just said generalized pain. That could mean almost anything. Sometimes it was a stubbed toe. Other times it was someone bleeding out who didn't want to say the real reason for fear of police showing up. It was never straightforward. This one was way out in the middle of nowhere, what we always called BFE. No streetlights, no neighbors close by, just endless fields broken up by the occasional tree line. By the time we reached the address, my partner and I were already tired, the kind of tired where everything feels slower and heavier than it should. The house was a small, beat-down place. The driveway gravel crunched under our tires as we pulled in, headlights catching the old siding and the shadows stretching across the garage. The front of the house was dark. It was so dark it almost looked abandoned, except for a faint glow of a TV screen flickering through one of the front windows. We expected someone to meet us at the front door, but instead an old woman came out through the garage side, waving us in. She didn't say much, just motioned with her good arm. I remember noticing right away that she had her other arm in a sling, but it didn't look like she had walked out of the house wearing it. Something about it looked staged. The garage itself was pitch black. I couldn't see anything but the outline of the doorway. We asked her to flip a light on, but she muttered something about the wires being chewed up by squirrels. My partner shot me a look in the dark, that half-joking, half-nervous expression we gave each other on weird calls. It was Halloween weekend, so maybe she was just eccentric, leaning into it. Still, walking through a dark garage into an unknown house at 3 a.m. wasn't exactly comforting. We went in. The living room looked stripped bare. No couch, no chairs, nothing except a mattress on the floor and a big, bulky TV blocking the front door. She told us she kept it there to stop people or zombies or whoever she was scared of from breaking in. The whole place smelled stale, like old fabric that had soaked in smoke and dust for years. The patient was her daughter, lying on the mattress. She was awake but barely moving, complaining about chronic pain. She looked used to it, worn down by it. This wasn't a life-threatening case, just another one of those calls where we transported someone who didn't really have an emergency but couldn't cope on their own. We got her secured on the stretcher and started to move her toward the rig. My partner pushed the stretcher while I cleared the path. The whole time, the old lady kept close to us. Something about her energy was off. It wasn't just eccentricity, it was sharper, like she was agitated, almost vibrating with nerves. As soon as we got the daughter into the back of the ambulance, I made a choice. My partner was a big guy, ex-military, someone who could handle himself if anything happened. He was also inside the rig with the patient strapped down, which gave me some relief. I decided to shut the door behind them and keep myself outside, figuring I'd manage the mother. The night air was cold and sharp. The only light came from the dim overheads on the rig, casting shadows across the gravel driveway. The old woman stood near me, still wearing that sling. She had been calm before, but now she shifted, restless, like she couldn't stand still. Then she walked up close and tried to hand me a Diet Coke, saying it was for her daughter. It seemed harmless, but something about the way she pressed it toward me didn't feel right. I told her no. That was when everything changed. Her whole expression snapped, like a mask dropping. She shouted something I didn't catch, then hurled the soda hard onto the ground. The can burst open and sprayed fizz across the gravel. Then she turned and bolted toward the house. I thought she was gone, but after only a few steps she spun back around and charged straight at me. In her hand was a knife. I don't know where she had been keeping it, maybe tucked under that sling. All I knew was the flash of the blade catching the faint light, and the way she came toward me fast, quicker than I thought she could move at her age. My chest went tight, adrenaline blasting through me. There was no time to think, only react. At that moment, the back door of the ambulance swung open. My partner leaned out, ready to update me that he was set to roll. The timing startled her. She froze just long enough for me to backpedal fast and put distance between us. I didn't wait. I yelled to my partner, jumped into the cab, and slammed the door shut. The rig roared to life, gravel spraying behind us as we pulled out. The ride to the hospital was dead quiet. My partner didn't ask questions right away. He knew the look on my face was enough. I sat there gripping the steering wheel too hard, knuckles white, heart still hammering. The daughter in the back didn't seem to care, lost in her own pain. It was just the three of us driving through the empty countryside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she might still be standing out there in the dark, watching us leave. When we got to the ER, we handed the daughter off to the nurses like any other call. Nothing about her case was unusual, but I couldn't stop replaying the moment outside, the way the old woman's body had twisted when she turned, the sudden speed, the flash of the knife in her hand. I went home after shift and shut the door of my apartment. For the first time since I started working, I broke down. I cried until my whole body ached. Not because of what happened, but because I realized how close it had been. I had walked into hundreds of strange houses before, and I had always thought I was ready for whatever I might find. That night proved how thin the line really was. One second I was just doing my job, the next I was almost another name in the paper, another EMT killed on duty. The scariest part wasn't even the knife. It was that it came out of nowhere. No warning, no reason, just a split second where a stranger decided to change the story. I never looked at vague calls the same way again. Every garage, every dark hallway, every eccentric patient after that, I was waiting for the moment when something would turn. That night before Halloween stuck with me. It wasn't ghosts or monsters or anything out of a horror movie. It was a tired, unstable old woman in the middle of nowhere who could have ended my life just as easily as she offered me a soda. And knowing how close I came, that was the part that never left me. I was in my 30s at the time, married with 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. By then, I had been in law enforcement for close to 9 years, and I was serving as a lieutenant with a special unit out of Lexington. Our work was focused on human trafficking, missing children, and cases where kids were being held in situations no child should ever have to see. I had seen a lot already, more than most people ever would, and it left scars I still carry. Nights were the hardest. You go home, you sit down at the dinner table, you look at your children, and your mind drags you back to those basements, those locked rooms, those places you could smell before you even opened the door. It eats at you slowly, and you don't realize how much it's changed you until one day you're staring at yourself in the mirror and you don't recognize the man looking back. The last case I ever worked as a lieutenant was the one that ended me. It was in the mid-1990s, one of those hot Kentucky summers where the air hangs heavy and the nights don't cool down much. Our unit had been tipped off about 3 young girls living with their father in conditions described only as unfit. Those words rarely do justice to what we end up walking into, but this one was worse than most. We went in with a plan. Secure the house, get the girls out, and take the father into custody. It was supposed to be routine by our standards. I had no idea it would be my last. The house sat back on a dirt road, isolated with thick woods creeping up behind it. The siding was peeling, the roof sagged, and half the windows were either broken or patched with plywood. Even before stepping inside, I could smell rot and filth coming through the walls. When the door opened, the heat of the place hit me like a wave, thick with the stench of waste, sweat, and decay. The air was so foul it burned the back of my throat. We moved in, weapons ready but expecting little resistance. The father didn't fight. He was sitting on a couch with springs coming through the fabric, looking almost bored, like he'd been waiting for us. We secured him quickly, but what I saw next still wakes me up at night. Down a narrow hallway, behind a locked door, we found the girls. 3 of them, all under the age of 10. They were chained to the wall, thin as sticks, bones jutting through skin that hadn't been washed in who knows how long. Their hair was matted with dirt, their skin smeared with filth. The floor around them was covered in feces, some of it old and crusted, some of it fresh. The walls had streaks of it smeared across, like someone had tried to paint with it. The smell in that room was so thick I almost gagged through my vest. In the corner was a cracked plate with scraps of food crawling with flies. That's where they ate. That's where they slept. Right there on the floor like animals. I stood there staring, frozen. I had 2 little girls at home, both with clean beds, toys, full bellies. And in front of me were 3 little girls who hadn't been shown an ounce of love or care from the man who was supposed to protect them. I could picture my daughters in their place, chained, broken, robbed of everything. My chest tightened and rage started boiling up inside me. We got the girls out first. They didn't make a sound, didn't cry, didn't even look confused. Just blank, hollow stares as officers carried them out of that room and into daylight. That silence was worse than screaming. It told me how much they had already endured. With them safe, we turned back to the father. He was standing between 2 of my men, cuffed, walking out toward the patrol car. I stayed a few feet behind, watching. I could feel my pulse in my head, pounding harder with each step. The man walked like he had nothing to answer for, like he wasn't guilty of the horrors we had just pulled those girls out of. Then he stopped. He stood still for a moment, not saying a word. They told him to keep moving, and he did, but only for a few feet before stopping again. The 3rd time he stopped, I told him myself to keep moving. My voice came out sharp, louder than I intended. He shuffled forward, then suddenly turned his head and looked right at me. His face was smug, like he had something over me, like he knew exactly what he'd done to those kids and didn't regret a second of it. My blood went cold and then hot in an instant. I don't remember the exact moment my anger took over, but I remember the feeling. It was like a dam bursting, every horrible image I had seen over 9 years crashing into me at once. I grabbed him from behind, yanked him down hard, and slammed him face first into the pavement. His skull hit with a sound that I can still hear, a dull crack that made the other officers shout. They tried to pull me back, but I lost control. I slammed his head again, and again the pavement smeared with blood. Hands were grabbing me, trying to hold me back, but I kept going, rage blinding me. All I could see were those 3 little girls chained in that room. By the time they dragged me off him, his face was unrecognizable. His skull was broken, blood pooling under him. He wasn't moving. I stood there breathing hard, sweat pouring down my face, my fists covered in blood. My men were shouting at me, some yelling my name, others trying to check on him. But deep down, I knew he wasn't getting up. I had killed him. The ride back was silent. No one looked me in the eye. They didn't have to say anything. I knew what I had done. My career ended that day. The department cut me loose, pension gone, future gone. No trial, no second chances. I was finished. I went home to my wife and kids that night and sat in the dark while they slept. I listened to my daughters breathing in their beds and tried to tell myself I had done the right thing, that the man deserved it. But the truth is, the guilt ate at me more than the anger ever did. I had let myself become the very thing I swore to fight against. I had lost control and I could never take it back. Years later, I still see his face. I see the blood. I see the blank stares of those girls. When I told the story to someone I trusted, I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a boy. I wasn't proud of it. I wasn't strong. I was broken. I thought about my own children and what they'd think of me if they ever knew. That was the last day I wore the badge. My life split in two right there on that pavement. Before that day, I was a cop, a father trying to balance the horrors of the job with the love of my family. After that day, I was just a man with blood on his hands and memories I can't wash away. And that's how it ended. Not with retirement, not with a medal, not with pride, but with remorse that has followed me every day since. I grew up knowing my dad didn't scare easy. He's a police officer, and because of that, I always thought he had a stronger stomach for things than most people. He's been through more than his fair share of calls involving violence, accidents, and all the ugly things most people would never want to witness. I was always curious about the stories he carried around, the ones he never told anyone. But when I asked him about scary stuff, he always brushed me off. He never fed into talk of ghosts, monsters, or anything supernatural. He shut that down quick. My dad lives in the real world, and in his world, the scariest thing you can face is another person. The one story he did share with me wasn't even from his shift, but it stuck with me because of how out of character it was for him to admit something unsettled him. It happened years ago, before I was born. There was this house in our hometown that everyone knew about, even if they didn't talk about it much. Back in the 80s, there had been a brutal murder there. The kind that makes the news for weeks and sticks in the back of people's minds for decades. I don't know every detail, but from what I gathered, someone had been attacked inside the house, and it wasn't clean or quick. It was violent, the kind of scene police officers don't forget. Years later, one of my dad's friends was thinking about buying that same house. It had been remodeled and put back on the market. My dad went with him to check it out, just to give his opinion and probably to keep him company. He knew the history of the place better than most people. His friend wasn't from town originally, and he had only heard vague mentions of what had happened there, nothing concrete. He didn't realize the house they were walking into was the very same one that had soaked up that kind of blood years before. The place looked normal enough from the outside. It was an older 2-story house with faded paint, the kind that had seen families come and go. The grass was patchy, and the driveway was cracked, but nothing about it screamed what had happened inside. My dad told me that the inside had been updated. Fresh paint, new flooring, new fixtures. But if you've been in enough crime scenes, you notice things differently. You look past the cosmetic repairs. He said that as soon as he walked in, he remembered the layout of the house. Certain details stuck with him. He could picture where the furniture had been, where the old stains had been, even though they were covered now. He didn't say much to his friend about it at first. He didn't want to ruin the walkthrough. There was another woman there with them. My dad couldn't remember exactly who she was. She wasn't local. Maybe she was a friend of his friend's wife, maybe just someone along for the viewing. She had no ties to the house, no reason to know what had happened there. But when she walked in, she froze. My dad described her face as if she had walked into something rotten. She just stopped moving, looking around like she felt something heavy pressing down. She didn't go wandering room to room like the others. She stayed near the entrance, arms crossed, and then finally spoke up. She said she didn't like the place. She said something bad had happened there. She couldn't explain it, didn't give details, just that she didn't want to be in there. My dad said it wasn't just the words that got him. It was the way she said it. She was shaken, like she knew it in her bones. My dad's not someone who buys into feelings or vibes. He doesn't believe in that stuff at all. But watching someone react that strongly to a place he knew had been a real crime scene made his stomach turn a little. The house itself didn't give anything away. There weren't cold drafts or flickering lights or anything that would make a person's mind run wild. It was quiet. Renovated walls, clean floors, a blank slate. But sometimes blank slates don't erase what's soaked into them. My dad didn't try to scare his friend out of buying it. He just asked him straight if he remembered hearing about the murder back in the 80s. His friend had only the vaguest memory. He knew something had happened in town back then, but didn't connect it to that exact address. My dad explained it plain and simple, that the house they were standing in had been where it went down. His friend's face changed when he realized it. Like the clean walls and fresh carpet didn't mean much anymore. What stuck with my dad, and what stuck with me when he told me, was that the woman who came along had no way of knowing. She wasn't from around there. She hadn't been told the history of the house. Yet her reaction was immediate, strong, and undeniable. My dad, the man who never humored ghost stories or unproven feelings, admitted that her reaction made him uncomfortable. He didn't chalk it up to anything supernatural. He said maybe sometimes people just pick up on things. Maybe the way a room feels, the way a house holds itself, tells you more than you want to know. His friend didn't end up buying the house. Whether it was because of the story, the woman's reaction, or just a gut feeling, he let it go. Someone else eventually moved in, and life carried on like it always does. But my dad said he never forgot that walkthrough. He told me once that the worst part of being an officer isn't always the moment of the crime scene itself. It's how those places stick with you after the uniforms leave, after the tape comes down. People clean up, paint over, remodel, but you can still stand there and remember exactly what happened. The house becomes another house again, but in your head, it doesn't. He said that's why he doesn't like talking about it. Because once you've seen enough, the walls don't stay quiet anymore. That's as much as he's ever given me about it. No ghosts, no shadows moving in the corner. Just a regular house that had seen something awful, and a woman who felt it without ever being told. For my dad, that was enough. It was one of the few times he admitted that some places carry weight you can't ignore, even if you can't explain why. The reason this story always gets to me is because it came from him. He doesn't tell campfire stories, doesn't play up the dramatic, doesn't try to spook anyone. If he said it unsettled him, then it really did. And the clearest part of the ending is that he never needed to believe in anything supernatural for the story to matter. For him, it wasn't about ghosts at all. It was about memory, history, and the way violence never really leaves a place. It might get painted over, but it doesn't get erased. Hearing that from someone who has seen more real horror than I ever will made me realize something. Some houses aren't haunted by ghosts. They're haunted by what people are capable of. And that's worse because it's real. I'm not a cop, but my dad was. He worked patrol for years and never told me the craziest stories, but every once in a while he'd let something slip. There's one story he told me when I was older that still sticks with me, and honestly it creeps me out every time I think about it. It wasn't about a shooting or a big drug bust or a chase. It was about one call he went on in the middle of the night, out in a wooded area, where things just didn't add up. The call came in a little after 1 in the morning. It was listed as a suspicious person on someone's property. Nothing unusual about that. Dispatch gets those kinds of calls all the time. Sometimes it's just a drunk neighbor, sometimes it's kids screwing around, sometimes it's nothing at all. He told me he didn't think much of it at first, just another late-night check. The address was way out though, tucked deep into a wooded part of the county. It was one of those areas where the houses sit on long stretches of land, with thick tree lines cutting them off from the road. He said the air already felt heavier just driving in. His headlights swallowed by trees on both sides, only giving him a tunnel of view directly in front of the car. The road was cracked and narrow, no streetlights, no signs of other homes nearby. When he finally reached the property, the house itself set him on edge. He described it as tall, maybe 3 stories, but run down. The siding was rotting, the paint peeling off in long strips. It looked abandoned in some spots, but what stood out was the amount of windows. He said it looked wrong. Almost every side had row after row of windows, many of them wide and tall, like they had been added over time without much care. In the beam of his patrol car's headlights, the glass looked like black holes stacked on each other, reflecting the light back just enough to remind him that they were there. The place gave him the feeling of being watched before he even got out of the car. He parked at the end of the dirt drive and stepped out, flashlight in one hand, the other resting near his sidearm. The night was dead quiet, the kind of silence you only get out in the woods, where no cars pass, no dogs bark, no hum of traffic in the distance. He scanned the yard, slow and steady, keeping the light low so his eyes could adjust. The grass was overgrown, weeds choking out most of the path leading up to the porch. He moved forward, boots crunching on gravel. The smell of damp earth and rotting wood hung in the air. He was about halfway up the walkway when it happened. Out of nowhere, a deep voice bellowed through the dark, so loud and sharp it froze him in his tracks. "Take one more step and I'll blow your head off." The voice wasn't shaky or panicked. It was steady, strong, like whoever said it meant every word. He whipped his flashlight toward the house, trying to catch a shape, a shadow, anything. But the windows, all those damn windows, threw the light back at him. It was like aiming into mirrors. He couldn't see past the glare. The beam bounced off the glass, leaving him blind to whoever could have been inside. He said his heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his neck. The silence after the shout was worse than the voice itself. He stood there, not moving, not daring to step closer. Then another voice from a different spot in the house, maybe higher up, maybe to the side, called out, "Put your hands up and light down." He knew better than to argue. He slowly raised one hand, lowering the flashlight, but as he did, he pressed his thumb against the emergency button on his radio. That was something he'd never done before. He told me in his entire career, he could count on one hand the times he even thought about hitting it. But this time he didn't think, he just did it. For him, those next minutes dragged like hours. He stood there, hands partially raised, flashlight angled down to the ground, trying to keep his breathing under control. His mind was racing. Who were these people? Why were they inside the house? How many of them were there? And more importantly, did they actually have guns trained on him right then? He tried to listen for movement inside the house, but all he could hear was the faint ringing in his ears and the blood rushing in his head. The air felt thicker, heavier, like the woods themselves had closed in on him. He said he held that position for about 10 minutes, though it felt much longer. Every second, he expected the crack of a gunshot, a flash from one of the windows, something, but nothing came. Then, in the distance, he caught the first flicker of red and blue cutting through the trees. His backup had arrived, and not just 1 or 2 units. When an officer with his reputation hit the panic button, the whole shift came. He said cars came screaming down that narrow road, tires spitting gravel, spotlights flooding the property from every angle. Within seconds, he was no longer alone. Officers were fanning out, weapons drawn, voices calling out commands, lights sweeping across the house and yard. He lowered his hands, relief flooding through him, but the tension didn't go away. Not yet. They surrounded the house, positioning themselves at every corner, every possible exit. Commands were shouted, warnings were given. Nothing. No movement. No voices. No shadows behind the windows. After waiting long enough and getting no response, a team moved in to clear it. The front door was locked. Solid. They forced it open and moved inside. One by one, they checked every floor, every room, every corner. My dad stayed outside, eyes still on those windows, waiting for something, anything. But when the officers came back out, they shook their heads. The entire house was empty. Not only empty, untouched. The floors were covered in dust. The rooms were bare. There were no footprints, no dishes, no furniture, no signs of anyone living there. Every single door was locked from the inside. The only sound in the house was the groan of old wood as they moved through it. They checked the perimeter again, searched the tree line, even walked the dirt road back toward the main road. Nothing. No people. No cars. No tracks that made sense. It was as if no one had been there at all. The call that brought him there had come from a neighbor half a mile away who thought they saw someone moving with a flashlight on the property. But now there was no one to be found. He told me standing there with half the department around him, he should have felt safe, but instead he felt unsettled. He couldn't shake the sound of that voice, how close it had felt, how direct the threat had been. He wasn't imagining it. And the second voice, telling him to put his hands up, he heard it clear as day. But there was no proof, nothing to point to, just an old, broken-down house with too many windows staring out at the woods. In the end, they cleared the call as unfounded. They locked the doors back up as best they could and left the property. The report went down as suspicious activity. No suspect found, no evidence collected. That was it. My dad drove back to the station with his pulse finally starting to settle, but he told me that ride felt longer than any he had taken before. He didn't know if someone had been inside that house watching him through the glass, or if someone had been in the woods throwing their voice, or if there was something else he couldn't explain. All he knew was that the fear he felt standing there alone, not knowing if a rifle barrel was pointed at him from one of those windows, was real. Years later, he said that was one of the only calls that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up every time he thought about it. Not because of what was found, but because of what wasn't. The idea that someone could shout threats at him that close in that much detail, with backup arriving only to find no trace at all, it rattled him. And he admitted, in that moment, standing frozen in the yard, he thought he might not make it out alive. That was the end of it. No follow-ups, no arrests, no reports of anyone living there. Just a memory he carried with him. A story he only told a few times, and one that still leaves me uneasy whenever I picture that house with all those windows reflecting the light back, hiding whatever might have been behind them.